The 7 Factors for an Enlightenment by Venerable Rungruan Papasaro, Dr. Rungruan Lim Chu Patapa. The 6th group of the 7 Enlightenment Factors for Wisdom Development. After performing the 4 mindfulness foundations, then we can see the Dharma of the reality of life. Then we are ready for wisdom development in the 7 Enlightenment Factors. And at the moment of enlightenment, the Buddha emphasized on the necessity to have all the 7 enlightenment factors to be ready for the enlightenment as follow.
How? The 7 factors for enlightenment developed and cultivated so that they fulfill true knowledge and liberation. Here, a monk develops the enlightenment factor of mindfulness, which is based upon seclusion, dispassion, and cessation, maturing in release. He develops the enlightenment factor for the discrimination of phenomena or research on Dharma, the enlightenment factor of mindfulness, the enlightenment factor of effort, the enlightenment factor of concentration, the enlightenment factor of rapture, the enlightenment factor of tranquility, relaxation, the enlightenment factor of equanimity, purified mindfulness, which is based upon seclusion, dispassion, and cessation, maturing in release. It is, when the 7 factors for enlightenment are developed and cultivated in this way that they fulfill true knowledge and liberation.
1. Effort for enlightenment. In performing the Buddhist practice for enlightenment, we need to have a good effort throughout the practice from the beginning to the end. 2. Mindfulness for enlightenment. In performing the Buddhist practice for enlightenment, we need to start with initializing a mindfulness in the early part of the practice, and then maintaining the mindfulness throughout the practice, especially in performing an insight observation in the 4 mindfulness foundations. 3. Concentration for enlightenment. In performing the Buddhist practice for enlightenment, the mind must be concentrated so that the mindfulness will be empowered by performing the mindfulness meditation, which is specifically called the Buddhist meditation. 4. Rapture for enlightenment. In performing the Buddhist practice for enlightenment, after performing the absorption in the 2nd jhana, the mind will reach the state of rapture. A practitioner will realize that a rapture arises. 5. Tranquility or relaxation for enlightenment. In performing the Buddhist practice for enlightenment, after performing the absorption in the 3rd jhana, the mind will become relaxed. 6. Equanimity or purified mindfulness for enlightenment. In performing the Buddhist practice for enlightenment, after performing the absorption in the 4th jhana, the mind will reach the state of equanimity. A practitioner will realize that an equanimity arises, and then a purified mindfulness is developed to be used in an insight observation. Note, the reason to specify the term purified mindfulness is to emphasize that it is a special kind of equanimity with mindfulness. 7. The research on Dharma. In the threefold study strategy, the Buddha suggested to perform an insight observation to see the truth as it really is. Therefore, after performing an insight observation, data of mental phenomena will be consolidated and ulkal is to conclude for a knowledge. The Buddhist wisdom is not a miracle outcome. And it should be notices that the word research on Dharma has never been mentioned in the other parts of the practice before, and it first appears in the 7 enlightenment factors, because we can perform an analytical research only after we have sufficient data from observation to obtain the Dharma. In performing the Buddhist practice for enlightenment, after collecting sufficient and necessary information from observed mental phenomena in an insight observation, then applying the 4 Noble Truths in terms of functional analysis on an individual phenomenon and structural analysis on a system on a whole to gain insight wisdom of the truths of life within nature for mind liberation. The subject of research on Dharma is rarely explained in traditional Buddhist teaching due to the lack of scientific background knowing on how to conduct a research, and probably they have already implied the mantra onto the Buddhist practice. In Buddhism, the wisdom is a result from conducting a research on Dharma. The Buddha has already explained a special quality of mind in nature in terms of acknowledge element. Technically, the collaboration of 7 enlightenment factors activate the cognitive process development after making insight observations of the 4 mindfulness foundations, then applying the research on Dharma to understand the origin of finest defilements of the taints and latent dispositions arising at the craving, the clinging, and especially at the ignorance, then gaining the knowledge of whereabout in the process of dependent origination, and how to destruct all the defilements within the mind correctly.